Welcome to another episode of Estate Living Expert Insight Series. Today we're going to look at water and energy solutions. This has become quite a topic of conversation in the last few years and is becoming more and more important for community managers, property developers, individual homeowners to look for solutions around water management and power and utility sort of independence. Today, we have a wonderful group of people that are here as our panel, and we're going to look at these various options that are available and get a little bit of insight into what's happening behind the scenes within the municipalities, what's happening within government, and ready to unpack over the next 45 minutes this topic. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. We're going to run during the course of the morning 4 polls. These poll questions, and I'm sure most of you know how they work, they pop up onto your screen. You can answer the question and then click on the red corner and remove that poll out of your line of sight. For the panelists, it will come up on your screen as well. Unfortunately, you can't answer the polls, but you can just click them out of the screen for your own sake. So let us get going. This is the challenge of a 45-minute slot. We've got to be nice and sharp. Today, I have a little bit of a range of individuals that are joining us. First, it's Dr. Anthony Turton. He's the founding member of the SA Water Chambers. And he is going to be speaking to us about the now. So what's happening within municipality, what's happening within this opportunity for private and public sort of partnerships. We're bringing in Louw who's a director at GreenSun. They're offering mini grid solutions, virtual power stations and all of these types of new technologies, or old technologies as well that have been evolutionized and become new technologies. Michael Faber from Brightlight is a technical director there. He is looking at the property developers and the types of solutions we can bring in from the get-go whilst those products are being developed, and then the financing options around it. And we end off our morning with Gaston from Berg, who's the director of PEC Utility. And I think we really bring it home then, because we can have all these wonderful solutions, but how do we manage them in real life on a day-to-day with your homeowners and residents? So let us immediately move across to Dr. Turton. Thank you so much, Dr. Turton, for joining us today. And we really look forward to hearing what you have to say on the matter.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to talk to you and to all of your listeners or viewers. I'm going to just briefly tell you a little bit about what we're doing at the SA Business Water Chamber and give you a sketch of what's happening on the ground at the moment now. So let's just start off by saying that we formed the SA Business Water Chamber as part of the Public-Private Growth Initiative, when, to our great surprise, we found that while there's a lot of effort being made from the private sector to re-engage with government and to kickstart the economy, with a growth potential of potentially 5% per annum, that's what the PPGI intention is. There was no organization in the water sector, believe it or not. There's a Water Research Commission that does the research side. There are other entities like Louise, that professional organization for mostly municipal workers, etc., municipal professionals. But there was no one or no organization that looked after the business side of water, the whole water supply chain, the value chain. So we created the Business Water Chamber against the background of some very important and startling facts. And these facts I'm going to share with you now so that we can all be on the same page. The first fact is that South Africa is currently facing a fiscal cliff. So we are in great fiscal difficulty and growing fiscal difficulty. The COVID-19 pandemic has just simply exacerbated the onset of the fiscal cliff, where the bottom line is government is spending more money on wages and salaries and benefits than it is receiving from taxes. Simple reality. So over the last couple of years, decade or so, very little has been spent on operation and maintenance, and of course the front end of this is municipalities. So we have a situation today where about 60% of our municipalities are in some or other form of distress, some of which have totally failed, absolutely failed. thinking of places like Harrismith municipality, Mfuleni. There are others across the country, but those are the sort of stark ones. So with a totally failed municipal infrastructure, and on the one hand, and a fiscal cliff on the other, these two things are coming together. And the simple reality is that government is not going to be in a position to navigate its way out of this morass. It's simply not possible. It is physically not possible. We have a situation where most of our engineers have been purged from, I'm speaking now from the water sector, for various reasons. We're probably down to about 20% of the capacity, national capacity we had 25 years ago. They've simply been purged for various reasons, haven't been given contracts, moved to greener pastures. They're simply not there anymore. So we at a point now where we are facing literally a collapse, a domino effect collapse across the entire water value chain. I'm just going to give you some numbers because we've got very severe time constraints today, and I don't want to sort of sidetrack the issue, but I just want to give you some important numbers because we can't deny the facts. And I'm going to give you three numbers that are important for you to all to know. And the numbers are 38, 48, and 63. So please write them down, 38, 48, and 63, and I'll tell you what those are now. The total volume of all the water that we have in all of our rivers on an annual average is 48 billion cubic meters. That's the total volume of water, assuming that we're in an average year. And of that, we've got storage capacity in our dams of 38 billion cubic meters. Now, there's a difference of 10 billion cubic meters there, but you cannot store more than 60% of your what's known as stream flow without reducing your river to an open sewer, which is what's happened in South Africa. But now, so the bottom line is that 48, that's the number, that's the amount that's come from rainfall. That is getting less and less because of climate change and climate variability. So we can't create more water out of the sky. 38 is the total volume of all the water in all our dams in the country. But we need to create full employment by 2035, 63 billion cubic meters. So we've got a shortfall of about 23 to 25 billion cubic meters between now and 2030, 2035 in that time frame. So how are we going to get that water? And this is going to be acutely felt at all municipal level. Every single municipality is going to feel this. So this is the market for new water. Now, we cannot go and simply build a new dam and get water from a non-existent stream flow, and that's what people are trying to do now. You look at all along the coast, Port Elizabeth, East London, Cape Town. Cape Town's had day zero already. Port Elizabeth is currently in its serious day zero at this point in time. So the simple reality is that a couple of things are going to happen. The first thing that has to happen, irrespective of ideological intentions or political wishes, and that's completely irrelevant in this conversation, because facts ultimately will drive this the outcome. We have to create 25 billion cubic meters by 2035 of new water, and that's water that's engineered from old water. We've got to manufacture water from old water because we can't get it from any other surface supplies. And that's going to manifest along the coast mostly as desalination plants, but big utility scale, not Mickey Mouse little 1 megaliter a day package plants, seriously big stuff. And of course, the other thing is going to be the reprocessing of acidic water from mines, but also the recovery of water from waste, from sewage. Now this is going to be a development for the future. Now, let me just give you another number. Another number is 900 billion, approaching 1 trillion rand is the amount of capital needed just to refurbish our damaged infrastructure, just to bring it up to speed. Now, there's just simply no way that the taxpayer is capable of mobilizing that amount of capital. So it's just not going to happen. It cannot, it's not physically possible. So the only way to mobilize that 1 or so trillion rands worth of capital and to create this 25 billion cubic meters of water, which is equivalent roughly, just to get a conceptual model in your head, to about 2/3 of the total volume of all of the dams in the country. So take all of the dams in the country, we've got to generate about 2/3 of that total volume by 2035, new water. And there's a big business case to be made for new water. So what we're doing in the business chamber now is we are working very closely with government and the private sector and financiers and we're trying to bring in as many stakeholders as possible. And we're trying to develop this public-private participation, PPP, which is politically unacceptable because the trade unions don't like the idea of privatizing these services, and I'm sure all of you will have experience of that. So we call it whatever name is politically acceptable, but ultimately it's going to come down to some kind of partnership between entities such as homeowners associations, because they are responsible for the delivery of services to a number of people. And it's going to come down to what we call the generation of a special purpose vehicle, an SPV, which is a legal entity that is ring-fenced, that enables investors to put capital into this thing that's not going to get pilfered, where skills are transferred, where all the good things take place, where we eventually start rebuilding the capacity that's been lost because of service delivery failure. So these SPVs, there are a number that are already in exist in South Africa. And these are confidential and sensitive because the intellectual property as to how these things work is quite sensitive. But the bottom line is that the Water Chamber is now busy working with the Treasury, with the Presidency, with various stakeholders, some of who are resisting what we're doing, others are facilitating what we're doing. But we are creating these cookie cutter model SPVs that will be rolled out across the sector in the not too distant future. In closing, there's no shortage of capital. There is a huge amount of capital that's willing to go into the space, and there's no shortage of technology, but there is a shortage of bankable projects. So the idea of bankable projects is an important thing. And in this regard, my closing statement is that we are busy engaging with government and with Parliament to create an independent water regulator, because it's quite clear that the Department of Water and Sanitation is unable to be both player and referee. And as long as they are both player and referee, then not 1 cent of capital will flow into the water sector, in which case all of your developers are going to be up the creek without a paddle, because the bottom line is that we've run out of water. So those are the numbers, 38, 48, and 63. We've simply run out of water. We have to now start looking after our own creation. I think I'm pretty much on my time there, so I'll hand back to you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Turton. That's an enormous amount of information. So just a quick question coming in from the side, from the audience that are listening today, is are you referring to an independent water producer to our grid, similar to an IPP in energy?
Yes, there's an enormous overlap between us and the energy sector. So ultimately, it's going to come down to an independent water provider, IWP. There are examples of that. For example, some mining operations that, as part of their mine closure strategies, are responsible for spending huge amounts of money to dewater their mines anyhow. And in some of the remoter areas, this is there's infrastructure in place, and this is viable. So yes, absolutely independent water producer. And one of them would logically be a utility scale desalination plant along the coast, coastal cities, but I'm talking here about 150 megaliter per day capacity. I don't want to get into too much detail, but that's in the pipeline.
A second question just coming in as well from the sideline there. Do you have any comment on the importing of Cuban engineers by government?
Yes, look, the Cuban engineers have got absolutely no skills that we don't have. I can speak for an hour on that. It's a topic alone. No, the bottom line is it's a political issue, not a technical issue. In reality, they provide like 60% of their people with safe water, and even in our diminished state, we supply about 90-something% of our people with reasonably clean water. So we can teach them; they can't really teach us. The important thing about the Cubans is that they're not signatories to the Washington Accord, and the Washington Accord defines the professional status of all professional engineers globally. So no Cuban has got that what we would call a pure eng qualification, and therefore they may not sign off on any design. Simple fact of the matter.
So just to also bring it a little question back sort of home, coming from me, looking at a comment you made earlier around homeowners associations being one of the bodies that would ultimately play a role in this sort of public-private potential that this will offer. You know, the homeowners associations are at the same time very much marred by red tape. And that's not just in the water, that's in the power areas as well. how do you see the relationship between municipalities and HOAs rolling out? I'm sure homeowners associations would, if they have the money, I'm sure that they would invest in resources, but are unable to do that as quickly and as efficiently and as cost saving as possible due to red tape.
Yeah, look, that's a very complex issue, the topic for a conversation in its own right. In reality, homeowners associations can actually do very little about it because they're at the end of a value chain. They are simply a stakeholder in a value chain. So they've got to look after the interests of their constituency, which are the members of the homeowners association. So it's in their best interest to have a good working relationship with the service providers, which is the municipalities. But ultimately, with the failure of service provision at municipal level, I can see that this will be outsourced ultimately to the sort of PPP type of establishments. This will be resisted by the trade unions, but if there's good news in the current crisis of Corona-19, that good news is the fact that the trade unions are getting smaller and smaller because less and less people are employed. So if there's anything, I would say that the trade unions are getting weaker as a result of this. So at some point in time, some reality will prevail.
Last question, but being a Cape Townian, having lived through and got through day zero or close to day zero, I was when researching for this topic, reminded yourself of living on 50 liters a day and all of these other types of things. There was some controversy at the time about using boreholes and, going into the water tables and things like that. Have you got any comments around that? Do you think that borehole water and other types of water solutions, not desalination plants, are solutions?
Okay, water, wherever you find it in the hydrological cycle, is the same water. So water under the ground is the same as water in a river or dam. It's part of the hydrological cycle and it's owned by the government. The only water that's not owned by the government is water in the ocean. There's no government claim to that water, but it's all the same water. Ultimately, boreholes are being overdrawn. But having said that, from a risk mitigation perspective for a homeowners association, I personally think it's a very wise idea that HOAs look at a borehole plan for backup, simply for backup. But borehole water is increasingly contaminated with all kinds of nasty, so you have to treat it. And let's just get back to one important issue when comparing the cost benefit of all of these technologies. People have got this false belief that desalination is expensive. It's only expensive if you've got a very, very small plant and you've got a very, very short payback time. So these package plants that do 1 meg a day, they're very expensive per kiloliter. However, if you get to 150 meg a day, which is about a fifth of the supply of what the city of Cape Town would take on a daily basis, you've now got a large plant that's got a payback period over 30 years of time. You get to parity with water from the surface. So in other words, suddenly the cost is no longer a factor, because if you don't have water in the surface, in the rivers and dams, what are you going to do? So the reality is that desal is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. The integration with solar is making it even better still. And in fact, one of the ways to store your off-peak energy from solar is in desalinated water. So Kucha, for example, in Port Elizabeth, East London area, Eastern Cape, there's an example where lots of wind turbines exist. They could store that surplus energy actually in desalinated water. So that's just an alternative way of looking at water and energy.
Thank you so much. And we really appreciate your insight into this topic and coming on board and sharing your experiences. And we have a lot more questions, but we need to move on to keep within our time. We'll keyboard warrior those questions during the course of this further to this webinar. So, and let us move immediately. We've spoken a little bit about water and where we stand with water. What I'm excited about, what GreenSun's been doing, and thank you so much, Anon, for joining us, is this concept of a virtual grid, this concept of of energy solutions within high dense spaces, almost like the technology has evolved quite a bit from when 10 years ago when we were talking about solar panels going in at Valdivie, how much everything has shifted. Maybe I could just hand straight over to you and you could tell us more about that.
Thank you, Louise. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm excited to discuss smart grid solutions, or like we all know, microgrid solutions. Now, we tend to think, just the next slide, we tend to think when one thinks about the microgrid solution is one big central battery system and you need plenty of space for a PV plant. And as you all know, most estates don't have that luxury. So the idea is to create a decentralized system using standalone homes and semi-detached homes. So you have your own little system in your house, and getting these systems to interact with each other, to stabilize the grid within a community, but offering that at a zero capex cost, and we can discuss that later. Just the next slide, please. So that is the focus, just on residential homes. And we can do the whole solution like we do in Mauritius and islands like that. But for this discussion, on the next one, we're going to look at just, this is what Dr. Anthony brought up now, is why we are at this junction in time is obviously the infrastructure. We have issues with price increases. I just had a meeting this morning with one of the leading municipalities. They're getting graphs daily from Eskom. And I don't know if you guys know, but 40 weeks of a year, there is a shortage of power from Eskom delivering power. So that's going to stay with us, load shedding. So with these issues and cases, we need to look at microgrids and be self-sustainable. But it comes down to creating a virtual power plant. Now, a virtual power plant on the next slide is the control system to manage all these various renewable energies. So you're still going to be grid connected in some sense, but looking at the desalination plants, your wind turbines, if there's space for a big storage system, all these systems needs to integrate to each other. And also on the payment side of things, your billing, the smart meters, all of these components need to talk. And that is what we offer. That is what we bring to this fold. So focusing again on households and estates is you're going to use your system as self-consumption, and I'll explain it in the next slide, but be able to feedback that excess power to your neighbor, or you buy that excess power from your neighbor to assist and charge your battery. And all of that energy flow within your estate. Now, we need to understand how energy flows, what it looks like in a house. And on the next slide, the best way to kind of describe that is with a graph. This is one of the homes in Baldwin. And to understand that graph, the yellow bars, that is representing our solar. So we can see the solar and actually the excess solar charging the battery. So we're just going to run down a few prompts in there. But the excess solar charging the battery being the yellow bar, the red portion representing the house load. And the interesting part is your battery, the blue bit, charging and discharging. So that's in a period of 24 hours. So you can see this client in 24 hours, and that's 2 weeks ago, has an independence of 60%. And 7 days, it's more 70%, and almost moving into winter now. But the red portion is what you need to supplement, and that is normally coming from Eskom. We are saying within an estate that can either come from your common areas or your neighbors buying either their solar power or their battery power to assist your system in your house, or you sell back to them. That is what we're currently seeing in Australia happening and California. So those guys are the leaders in it. So it's been already greatly successfully implemented, and we need to bring this to South Africa to get some energy security. A very interesting thing on the next slide I want to show you guys is Eskom is wanting to move to time of use. So they're already forcing all municipalities on time of use, and homeowners will, and it seems like it might move to that quite soon as well. So with the microgrid system, one can schedule your batteries and PV to charge and discharge. So we can see the first two bars, charging, your batteries discharging during peak times, your expensive times. And during the evening and the daytime, we can charge these batteries. So this is an actual system that we have in a farm, but estates connected directly to Eskom, like Longlands Estates and those guys. All these homes can work together, decentralized batteries, to kind of give you that graph to completely get away from your high tariff usage. Now, it comes down to, just the next slide, sorry. So you need different building blocks, and we tend to stay with the technologies that work. There are various technologies out in the field, but it needs to be a bankable product. And we found these components to work the best, have a proven track record. To be bankable, we're looking at a 15-year lifetime on the batteries to get to a certain number, which we'll explain soon. But it's not just these components. As I mentioned earlier, it's a control system to talk to these hardware to be able to kind of regulate the energy flow within an estate. But all this we need to kind of bring back to a kilowatt hour usage. That's where the bankable side of it comes in. So again, the next slide. Oh yeah, and that's the thing why we don't see so many solar PV systems in the States and residential homes. It's still that cost issue. It's still rather expensive. Look at 145,000 Rand for a single phase residential house. 3-phase, more expensive, 300,000. That's a massive capex cost for most. And this, on the next slide, we can offer at similar to what we're getting at City of Cape Town at the rate of R2.50 per kilowatt hour. It's a fully installed system throughout the estate at that cost of R2.50. To put that into perspective is 1st of June, Eskom will increase their prices. City of Cape Town will increase their price. So your first 600 units, you're going to pay R2.72, and over 600 units, R3.31. That's some high numbers. To compare that to the PPA price for a fully installed battery plus PV system. And again, what's the cost of energy surges and load shedding? Guys working from home. That is what we kind of need to manage the risk on that. Next slide, please. So again, it's a scalable system, and we have this reference of what the kilowatt hour cost will be for usage. But if you have a central plant within an estate, a central space, say an apartment block, one can install one PV system starting from R1.05 per kilowatt hour. So the homeowner association can distribute that power at a certain cost. Just panels for one residential home. One residential home. So I just want to clear some of this. One residential home is R1.40, and obviously we mentioned R2.50. Next slide. Comes down to, so that's a power purchase agreement, microgrid solution with all the controls in place. Again, getting energy security in place. Maintenance is included, and we heard about the special purpose vehicle earlier. So all of this will be wrapped within a special purpose vehicle to offer the tax benefits. And more to that, one can co-invest within this opportunity. And there's an opportunity for the homeowner association to either generate an income or with the savings, reduce the levies. One can structure it in various ways. But that is kind of what GreenSun can offer, and we've done the pilot project and we've seen the success in that, so it's working. So that is my quick story.
Thank you so much. That's a quick story. So also, again, a lot of information that's being shared there. And you know, when you say reduce the levies, my heart always stops beating, because I think every estate management team breaks into a bit of a cold sweat when that term is said. Though perhaps not reduce the levies, but perhaps reduce the electricity bill for the homeowners and residents. Just a question, because I think that technology is moving and changing so much, so quickly. When you talk about a mini grid system, I sort of view it in two ways. So one is it possible to have a system in place that you can access only when the power goes off? So if the architectural guidelines of a development does not allow for solar panels to be on the exterior features, or if the roof structure doesn't host solar panels, is it possible to create a a version of a mini grid that can then power the essential items on the estate when the power goes off, for a lack of a better term? And would that still give the community a cost-saving mechanism?
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, one can still create that, but remember, you're still going to use Eskom to charge that battery. And it's a rather expensive battery, these lithium-ion batteries, to just sit there and wait for load shedding. One would want to discharge and use these batteries every single day to get to that bankable number of less than 2 Rand a kilowatt hour. So it is possible, but then it just becomes a nice to have, and there's no return in that. The panels is your power generation side, and we want to store that excess power into your tank, which is the battery, and use that whenever it's needed. So the battery is not just designed to sit there and wait for load shedding. We want to use it every single day. Another thing that the battery does is look at the kVA cost, so surge charges. It can also cap that, what we're trying to do with municipalities. So your kVA cost, that can be reduced from the battery side as well. So there's a bit of investment and bankable number that we're looking at to make it work. And what we've discussed with various estates is, if it's only a battery, then they would rather go with a backup generator for now. And the thing is, a backup generator always ties into your mini grid if you want to scale up and do that later.
So are you therefore saying that if you have a smaller community, so a fewer number of properties, that this might not necessarily be a solution for you? So, or is it just about the usage within those properties?
Just the usage within these properties. So even 20 homes, as small as 20 homes, we can offer the solution. So it's not just having battery backup, but having power that's coming at a cheaper rate than you're currently buying from your council as well, and having energy security in place. So it's, again, it's a scalable system. So you can start as small as 3 homes and run a municipality that we're kind of assisting with to get that also on the plans.
The other just comment, and I know we need to move on, just the other comment would be, I'm assuming then that there is, if the CapEx cost is funded by GreenSun, that the contract or the SL in place then would keep you on as the service provider managing that utility. What happens when there is a change in management within the estate or a change of directors? And we know, based on experience, that every new sort of board member that comes in wants to change the way things are done, and often has maybe a little bit of a personal motivation there. How flexible is this SLA or this contract?
That's right, very flexible. So you just transfer that in the contract to the new owners. So now it's easy, and the funding comes from various places. Brightlight also does the same funding. So we are the EPC, construction and engineering side, and any funders that wants to come on board, we can offer that solution and plug it into the community.
Okay. All right. Super. Thank you so much for your time. There's so much more we can talk about, but let's keep to our timeline. Let's move on. So GreenSun is offering a solution for residential communities that are both existing, mainly existing communities. They have other services available. But let us look at a new development. So the property developers that are looking to develop in the space, they obviously investor sentiment is driving the need for solutions and security around water and electricity resources. And maybe whether the South African investor is putting their money where their mouth is yet is maybe another discussion. But let us see how solar, or how the industry is supporting property developers. Michael, can I hand over to yourself, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about.
Thank you very much, Louise. Good morning, everyone. My name's Michael Faber. I'm representing Brightlight Solar and hope to present the developer model, the funding structures around the developer model that we have been implementing just recently. If we can maybe just first things first, have a look at a bit of a background around Brightlight Solar for some of you who may not be aware of who we are. We are a Section 12J company that was established in 2017. We have raised in excess of 330 million from investors, and the developments that have been, the investors' mandate is particularly to focus on solar PV solutions, battery storage solutions, and hot water solutions. We've taken the view that an underserved market is really the community schemes market, and our primary focus has been in that environment where that includes homeowners associations and body corporates. However, we have serviced commercial industrial customers as well. So to date, we've installed and funded over 100 sites with regards to solar PV and hot water solutions. And the whole model that we've presented to the community schemes environment has been a fully funded solution. So we provide the funding, all the upfront capital costs, as well as all the ongoing costs for that particular solution, which includes the maintenance and insurance for the term of that agreement that has been structured for the community scheme. So that just gives you a brief background around Bright Light, and hope to present the developer model. If you can just move on to the next 2 slides. One more. So just recently, we've been taking this funding and these solutions to the typically residential developers who would be constructing a sectional title scheme or a homeowners association. We have been providing, again, the fully funded solution, both on the solar PV side, to provide power to that residential development. In certain instances, we've potentially included funding for battery backup for these developments in order to alleviate the effects outages have, such as load shedding and potentially other issues such as cable theft and things like that. There is a bit of a caveat when it comes to the funding for the battery storage solutions. A lot has to do with the tariff that's being applied by the utility, whether that's Eskom or a municipality. If that bulk residential tariff that's being supplied to the council is particularly low, the likelihood of a battery storage solution is likely not going to happen at this stage, given the costs of battery storage. And I think we spoke about that previously. But if the tariffs, and we are seeing in some utility sites, the tariffs are becoming very feasible for battery storage solutions, and just recently have been starting to implement those into some developments. We also provide funding for hot water solutions, and these typically take the role of a central storage solution together, coupled with a central heat pumps that would efficiently generate hot water. These solutions are not, the hot water solutions are not applicable in all developments, but certainly if the design of the development lends itself to a central solution, then it's ideally suited to these types of central hot water solutions. We've also then coupled to the previous 2 solutions, we've provided funding in the past for the electrical and water metering. This assists us certainly from the recoveries, both on, if you look at the hot water solution, we would provide a cold and hot water meter to each of the unit owners. And on the electrical side, we would provide a smart meter that would be coupled with a smart wallet where the recoveries both on electricity and hot water can be made. So we have provided funding together with that. And then lastly, for some of the developers that we've provided solutions for, we have a strategic partnership with Sectional Title Solutions, who have a smart technology division, who've been providing fiber to the home and particularly visitor management solutions for the developers that are looking for these smart solutions for the developments. So if we can go to the next slide. So what's the value proposition and we've broken them down into both the value proposition for the developer and the community scheme. So starting with the developer, number one is the developer doesn't have to outlay the capital for these solutions that we are bringing to the developer. So that's obviously a huge advantage to them. They get the opportunity to have a smart and efficient development with which they can market to the public, which sets itself apart between other developments in the area. So from a marketing perspective, this is quite useful. And then potentially where we have been able to introduce battery storage solutions, the ability to potentially market the development as a load shedding free zone. So that's given our current climate with Eskom, I think that's quite relevant these days. With regards to the community scheme, a smart and efficient community with which to live, but particularly everyone's looking for savings, and these solutions are geared and designed to implement savings within these developments. So the reduction on running costs, both on obviously providing alternative energy solutions like solar PV, efficient water generation is far more efficient and creates a bigger saving for these unit owners. If we can do it more efficiently than potentially historical technologies. One area that we do see a benefit is in community schemes, is where because we've taken over the insurance costs of these geysers and moved that responsibility to Brightlight, that's quite a big advantage for these body corporates. Also the ability with the smart metering to be able to recover outstanding fees makes it a real benefit for the community scheme. And lastly, with the visitor management solutions that STS provides, a safe and secure environment with which to live. The last slide, please. So from an approval process, we get asked this often on how to unlock the funding for these types of solutions in developments. Essentially, there are three aspects to it. The first being a signed, what we use as an electricity services and supply agreement. Some of you may be familiar with it, a PPA, a power purchase agreement structure. It's very similar, and that'll be for obviously the consumption of the solar electricity. We have a separate agreement that we would need signed, which is our hot water services agreement. And this would potentially include the heat pumps or the storage capacity in the tanks, or in certain cases, the actual plumbing, if that's what's preferred. So, and then lastly, because of the way the experience we have in this environment, we would need a guarantee from the developer that if the agreements, the first two agreements are not ratified at the inaugural general meeting, and that these contracts don't pass through to the body corporates, that we would have some guarantee that these payments would be settled to Brightlight. So this guarantee would fall away once it's ratified and passed over, but those are the three requirements from our side. And I think that was me.
Thank you so much. Folks, we are running a little bit over time, but I just quickly want to ask a question here, and it's something that's coming up, and I think I know the answer to it, but I'm going to ask you anyway. It's a 12J scheme, investment scheme, and as we know, in June this type of offering has come to an end and hasn't been renewed. It's been replaced with what, the 13.6, and I just the question coming from the audience then is, what happens in June?
So just briefly, Section 12J always had a sunset clause in June 2021. All that's happened is that Treasury and SARS have not extended the opportunity for Section 12J beyond that sunset clause. Any historical funds that have been raised and claims that have been made by investors will still apply. So the funding we've raised, the existing funding we have raised, we are still have some funding available to allocate to projects. Going forward, after that, we have various other sources that we do raise funding from, whether it's commercial banks or different institutions. So in fact, we were planning on, yeah, I'll leave it at that, but there's no impact to Brightlight Solar.
Okay, great. So we've seen how a detailed sort of description of how what that service is offering. And I did note, I was going to ask you the question about what happens when you shift across to the HOA and those agreements, but I see you did answer that. So I think perhaps let's move across to Gaston so that we can wrap up whilst everybody's still with us. Again, Michael, there's a few questions that have come up for you in the chat box. Please feel free to answer them. I'm sure they would appreciate it. Gaston, at the end of the day, it comes down to the action that the homeowner and resident is putting in on a daily basis, and that is the smart metering solution and managing the utilities. Perhaps we could bring you in at this point and you can round up this discussion and tell us a little bit about PEC and where you see all of these new technologies going and what opportunities they're going to offer end users at the end of the day.
Thank you, Louise. Hi guys, my name is Gaston, representing PEC Utility Management. We are basically, in short, a private sector municipality. We don't want to always want to draw the parallel to the word municipality, but the functionality of the local government to protect the revenue and distribution of the electricity or water being supplied to consumers. We all know that is basically where the shortfall is. We need to make sure that we can actually make these models work. Homeowners have to take, as part of owners associations, body corporate and our commercial clients, take responsibility of the entire supply chain of generation, transmission, and the distribution when we look at these type of projects. It's a long-term investment, obviously. We know that we don't have much of a choice. In terms of political will and the damage already being done, we don't have any other option but to take control. And within these communities, we have the opportunity to do so. It is a very imperative approach to make sure that we understand exactly what we have, what we need, and where we're going with it when we make these investments. So as a utility manager and a reseller, essentially, our organization and our industry understand exactly what is required to run this entire supply chain for various reasons, not only because we're looking at independence. We are probably going to be involved in joint supply environments for quite some time because of the costs involved. Your grid-tied solutions will probably be running for quite a few years before we get into a position that we can actually move off grid totally. And that entire environment needs to be measured and at the same time translated into monetary value so that we can protect our investment and understand exactly on an annual basis how we need to adapt or what the next moves are towards expansion or changes that we need to make in our initial design. I think the most important part of the approach is the planning and understanding, but we fortunately have a very strong private sector and some of the best technical minds in our country that set up these typical alternative energy or water supply and preservation environments. And fortunately, we have those people and we have a long list of brilliant companies that get involved. But in layman's terms, for any HOA or management entity to get involved, you need to understand exactly what you have currently. And that's where we get involved in the industry to make sure that we do technical assessments, we consult, offer what type of measurement can be done to understand what the options are out there. We partner with many solar organizations to supply data for the planning process and then obviously for the management beyond and going forward. I think my colleagues on this panel will agree. You will not also only implement one design project. There are many changes within a year, improvements in technology, changes in pricing, many aspects that we need to take into consideration when we run these type of projects. As I said in the beginning, we take responsibility for the supply chain. There's nobody else to blame anymore. We can't blame Eskom if we're totally, grid independent. We can't blame the municipalities. We have to look after those ourselves. And that is basically the approach that we focus on in terms of managing the entire future of alternative resources. I'm not sure how much time I still have left. Maybe I should take a few questions and elaborate on that.
Thank you so much, Gaston. Yeah, thank you for keeping that so short. And I know we're running a little bit over time, but to all of those that are still with us, I think this is a very valuable, question. As a private company that is managing utilities and understanding, you mentioned that the research and the understanding of the process is the first part and very important. Is it therefore only really feasible to be working with a homeowners association that's already formed? Or how do you put that kind of research into when working with a property developer that hasn't yet sold their units?
Yes, I think the technical information, obviously we have a long enough period that has gone past globally and locally in our country. South Africans are tough consumers. We don't believe anything that we hear or see. So we need our local experience as well to make sure that we make these decisions. I think the options, we have a very wide variety of options currently in the country. The competitive pricing is becoming a reality. But technically, to understand exactly where we move from our current position, that's the main part. In terms of a developer, there are certain ideas and aspirations that each developer will have. And that's the starting point. And then we need to basically marry whatever is available out there and make sure that we have a rollout project that makes sense. You have your developers that retain their investment. Others sell it off immediately, so it all depends on what's your future planning on what you're going to be doing with the system. I want to use this opportunity. I just saw this on Facebook this morning. Something to leave everybody with. The one who plants trees knowing that he or she will never sit in their shade has at least started to understand the meaning of life. That long-term relationship that you have with your decision-making process. As you mentioned, when HRA management changes or board members change, the whole view and direction of where you go within your HRA may change at the same time. You have to take that into consideration as well going forward on what you spend in the long term and who you partner with.
Thank you so much. And it could be said, what you spend and who you partner with becomes very, very important in the sector. I think we've all learned that through municipalities. So I think we're coming to an end now. I thank you to everybody that has continued to stay with us, throughout the course of today's discussion. I hope that you found the information relevant and helpful, and that can assist you in the decisions that you're making within your communities or in your private homes, your developments. This is recorded. The recording will be going out in the next couple of days. We will also include responding to the questions that are in the chat box. I will also send out the information around all the panelists so that if you would like to contact them yourself directly, you may do so, and you have their information available. And thank you to all the panelists for being here today. This is a very exciting time that we're in with all these opportunities. I think that the fiber industry was in there in 2016 when people got excited and saw the need and the relevance of having effective communication and security of communication. And we all were very glad that we had taken those steps when the pandemic started. And perhaps we can learn from that lesson and be ready for when things, or if things do sort of start to fall apart a little bit. Thank you so much, Dr. Turton, for your expert insight, and we appreciate you joining us today. And for everyone else, have a lovely afternoon further, and thank you again for being with us.